Hello, everybody. Last week, the Victorian Attorney General, Jill Hennessy, wrote to the Governor-General asking for me to be stripped of my recent Australia Day honour because of my dangerous views, which are an insult to victims of sexual abuse. That's actually pretty funny because that's exactly what I am, a victim of sexual abuse. 50 years ago, as a 19-year-old university student, I was one of many victims of a Canberra doctor who fiddled with me in his surgery and was eventually charged with molesting his patients. I thought I'd tell you all about this because I've had enough of people like Hennessy telling us how we're allowed to talk about such experiences. So in 1997, I wrote in the Sydney Morning Herald about what that doctor did to me, outlining the complexities of this case, why a judge and then the full court determined he should not be charged, and how I felt about that. Now that article is being used as part of the endless media pile-on as feminists react to the news of my award. The usual suspects spent the entire week dishing out dirt about me. The story of the Canberra doctor is classic of their tactics, picking up unrelated phrases from my writing to show me in the worst possible light. So this was one of the stories about me published in New Matilda last weekend. In 1997, Miss Arndt defended a Canberra doctor who had molested multiple patients, including a 12-year-old child, arguing that the sex offender should not be charged over the molestations because in another context, masturbating a person would be a loving and pleasurable act. Note how deceptively the authors failed to acknowledge that I was actually a victim of this man, because that would have undermined their argument that my views are damaging to other sex abuse victims. Now, let me tell you what actually happened. I went to see this unknown doctor because I thought I might be pregnant, and I picked a medical practitioner on the other side of town, a long way away from my parents, which is exactly what most teenage girls do. He suggested an orgasm might be just the thing to bring on my period, and in a detached professional manner, he proceeded to try, unsuccessfully, to achieve just that with his fingers. I thought it was a bit odd at the time, but it wasn't a big deal for me, and I barely thought about it for the next 25 years, quarter of a century, until the first accusations appeared in the press about the doctor. In 1994, 13 women laid sexual assault charges against him. A judge, John Gallup, ultimately granted a permanent stay on the proceedings, noting that by then the man had retired from medical practice. Gallup said he'd be prejudiced by the long delay and relevant medical records had been destroyed. A full court supported that decision. Then, amazingly, the doctor sent a written apology to two of the victims, expressing his grief that he'd caused them such pain and suffering. I ended up interviewing a number of his victims, some of whom said an apology was all they wanted from the man. That's what my long, careful article was all about. What do victims actually want from a perpetrator? And is an apology ever enough? I urge you please to read it. It's on my website. I agreed with some of the victims who said that because he'd been given an apology and was no longer in practice, that was enough for them. But that said, I clearly spelled out in detail how important it is to prosecute and remove from practice doctors who betray their patients' trust. So what happened is I breached the feminist copybook by suggesting there's a difference between violent rape and what that man did to me. That happens to be the truth as far as the outcome of such experiences on victims, as the research clearly shows. It's just outrageous that feminists are forcing us all to lie and pretend that all sexual offences are equally damaging, even though the psychological literature clearly shows victim recovery is very much related to the type of offence, as well as many other factors. It's been so wonderful this week to hear from so many psychologists applauding me for daring to speak out about the silencing of this type of research. So butt out, ladies. I have every right to define my own experiences and to write about them without women like you distorting what I say and shutting down conversations about these important topics. You are deliberately creating moral panic to fuel the outrage industry, with your ill-informed, ideologically driven misinformation. But the recent job on me didn't end there. There was also the new Matilda attempt to discredit my professional qualifications. But funnily enough, despite the efforts on social media last year to tout for complaints about me, the authorities have 3 times determined I'm not doing anything wrong. At the start of my career, I had the best possible qualifications for clinical psychology that was available at that time, but I gave up practicing long before it was necessary to seek registration. It's shocking that the mainstream media is so happy to regurgitate new Matilda's claim that I'm faking my qualifications. But then there was the Bester interview, their favourite pedo smear. The feminists running much of mainstream media are using cherry-picked footage from the video I made with a teacher who was convicted of having sex with his pupil, and they're spreading that far and wide. My reasons for making that video on my website, and I've explained them in many interviews. I'm going to now post the video again through my website so you can judge it for yourselves. Please also have a look at the other article that relates to this issue, the story about the Scoutmaster, Robert Potter, that's also being widely circulated. I wrote at the time about his trial, expressing concern about the Sydney Morning Herald naming some of the crowd of people who came along to that trial, former Scouts and colleagues who obviously felt he was a good bloke. My nuanced article discusses whether people involved in sex crimes can ever be seen as having any redeeming features. Here's how that article ended. The real question is why we take such a perverted, obsessive interest in these sex crimes and fail to show similar passion for the unspeakable cruelty, emotional and psychological abuse which so many children regularly endure. Note that these malicious misrepresentation of my views underpin the damaging attacks on me by Rosie Batty and the action taken by Jill Hennessy in asking for my honour to be rescinded. And the mainstream media blithely repeated these untruths with no proper investigation and without acknowledging the conflict of interest in using material being promoted by end rape on campus activists, without mentioning the threat I pose to their activities promoting kangaroo courts on campus. I'm ready to move on from this slanging match and get on with the important work which won me my award, exposing the male-bashing narrative on domestic violence, the failure to address male suicide, the widespread use of false allegations of violence in family court battles, the anti-male culture in schools, universities and workplaces, and of course, the need to close down the illegal campus kangaroo courts. I'm delighted to have so many people signing up to help with my campaign. Please use my website to contact me and be patient. We're just swamped with new volunteers, but we'll be in touch soon. Thank you. Thanks everybody for supporting me on my YouTube channel. I've got growing numbers of subscribers, which is really exciting. If you'd like to support me financially, go to my donate page on my website. Thanks a lot.